Hello and welcome to Film Companion South. In FC Recco's this week, I'm going to recommend Spadikam. A 1995 Malayalam film starring Mohanlal as Thomas Chacko, and the film is directed by Bhadran. Before we begin talking about the movie, let's look at the name Thomas Chacko. It's obviously the character is a Christian, and this is one of the things I find very amazing about the Malayalam film industry because, as far as I know, this is the only mainstream film industry in India where we find a consistent rotation of Hindu, Muslim, and Christian characters, not just as supporting characters, but as the protagonist. This makes for a diversity of milieus, and this adds a flavor to these films and to this film too, which we'd otherwise call a mass film. How mass is the Thomas Chacko character? He's so mass that he gets his strength from drinking goat's blood. He slices up a live goat in the opening sequence and drinks its blood and gets his strength from that, and that's why he's called Adutoma. This sequence at the beginning, this action sequence is quite charged. Mohanlal rushes to this place where this action is going to take place, and he begins by pinning this man down by placing his foot on that man's neck. This is the exact sequence that we find. This move, signature move, is exactly what we find in Lucifer. So how mass is Adutoma? He's so mass that when he walks into a movie theater, the theater owner has to start the movie from the beginning because he walks in late. And the movie playing is Talapati, which stars Mammootty. How mass is Adutoma? He has a signature move where he removes his mundu, his veshti, and wraps it around the head of his opponent and kind of kicks them about. That is how mass he is. So Mohanlal spends a lot of time in this movie in his shots. So the Adutoma character is a bit of a gangster, not exactly a gangster, more of a ruffian, a goon, a thug. But that's only to the bad guys. Where in front of the good guys, he turns into a softie. I mean, very literally turns into a softie. When he sees a little girl crying on the streets, he buys her a softie ice cream. And for the longest time, and this is one of the many things that's very unusual about this character and the way this film is written, Adutoma doesn't have a heroine. He has a relationship with a sex worker played by Silk Smitha, and she unfortunately vanishes a little into the movie. I wish we had seen more of her, but perhaps the 90s were a little conservative, and maybe a sex worker character being a heroine to a slightly mass kind of hero might not have worked. But there's one very good scene with Silk Smitha and Mohanlal where the local inspector decides to humiliate him. He catches Mohanlal hiding in Silk Smitha's house, and he cuffs them both together and parades them around the town. And when Mohanlal sees his father, he's not too bothered, he kind of, because they're cuffed together, he kind of lifts, pulls a hand closer to his and keeps it near his heart. And the father gets very irritated. And that's a really nice scene because it also paves the way for the major conflict in the film, which is that between Mohanlal and his father, played by Thilagan. So that's the crux of Spadikam. These two parallel narratives that Mohanlal has going. One is with the cop that paraded them in the middle of this town like this, and the second one with his father, who is a maths teacher. With both these conflicts, it's a series of back and forths. One person does something, the other person retaliates, then this person retaliates to that retaliation, so on and so forth. That's how the film proceeds. What I liked about this film is that when you look at the conflict with the cop, it's not the typical hero-villain kind of mass movie antagonism, because it starts off on a very personal scale. Mohanlal is not doing some global thing like fighting for farmers or fighting against an MNC or any of these other things that you find in these mass movies these days. It's a very personal thing. It's a very small scale thing. The cops pay a visit to Mohanlal because they want to take him to the station. He says, no, I can't come, and he kind of makes a slightly insulting remark, and they report that insulting remark back to the cop. And the cop kind of, comes in search of Mohanlal, and because he cannot find Mohanlal, he catches Mohanlal's sister and takes her to the station. And Mohanlal is like, how dare you take my sister to the station? And he comes and beats up the cop. And this little personal thing kind of escalates into a big feud. And when it comes to the conflict with the father, it's a deep-rooted one. We get a big flashback for that. And this is how the film is so well written, because this conflict with the cop spills over to the conflict with the father as well. So that's when the father becomes so angry because his being, in the police station and stuff like that, that affects a proposal that they're looking at for Mohanlal's sister. And, the father actually canes Mohanlal in front of the cops and stuff like that. So that kind of escalates on its own out there. Gradually into the movie, our sympathies begin to shift. We think that Mohanlal is being a pain in the ass and his father is suffering, but then slowly we get a flashback that shows why this whole relationship happened, why Mohanlal turned into a goon, what his father was really like. And this is a really intense flashback. It's a period of 14 years, and the movie doesn't tell us what Adutoma did, that time he was called Thomas Chacko, what this boy did when he was younger and when he was away for so much time, but when he comes back he's transformed into this rowdy. One of the defining characters of Spadikam is its intensity. This is not the kind of film where you have a comedy track and other things to kind of appeal to many people. In fact, after the flashback is over, you get to this supremely intense scene where Mohanlal cuts off the sleeves of his father's shirts, and that's again something you'll know when you watch the flashback. The only problem that I had with this film somewhat is the heroine character who appears almost an hour and a quarter into the movie. It's not Urvashi's fault, she's fine, but the way the character is conceived is a bit cutesy. She does these kinds of things where she, Mohanlal feeds her liquor and she gets a bit tipsy and there's a song and things like that. These cute moments kind of, they're not bad exactly, and Urvashi does play a big role in bringing out that human side of Mohanlal later on in the movie, because she goes back, she's an old school friend of his and she's kept stuff of his that that humanizes him even more. But the cutesiness, that flavor, I felt it reduces the intensity a bit, but only a bit. So yes, as you'd expect from a 1995 movie, some elements seem a little dated. The song picturizations, for instance, you look at them and you kind of have this thing that we don't shoot songs like these anymore. But the movie just works like gangbusters because Mohanlal is so good and Thilagan is so good, and the conflict is so good, that all these conflicts, it's such an intense movie that all these surrounding, these small flaws around it, even the way the movie is shot, for instance, you might find some issues with it if you're looking at it from a today's perspective, but all these issues just fade away because this is such a great entry in the mass movie tradition. Mohanlal plays this character so wonderfully because, and I told you earlier that there was no comedy track, right? Because you don't need it, because Mohanlal plays this character with both the intensity that I mentioned and with a wink. He takes the character very seriously, yet not too seriously, so he's always bridging that fine line where he's both like a character in the movie and a bit stepping back and being a little self-aware that he is playing a larger than life character in a mass movie. So that's the FC Recco for this week. Spadikam, it is available on YouTube and Hotstar with subtitles. I'm going to be recommending only films that are available with subtitles in this segment. See you next week in a new FC Recco.